I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. That's how I saw it and see it still.
Thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Motley Show, and we'll talk about that video a little bit later. But it might have already given you a hint as to what this episode's about. We're going to talk about the immigration debate, and we're going to talk about the executive orders that Obama just issued. Now, first off, let's just answer the question, why did he need to issue this? Why do we need to fix the immigration system? Both sides, everyone in the country, agrees that it's broken. So, right now, we have 11 million undocumented immigrants in the country, at least estimated. That's a huge population. Now, what to do about those people is the question. Now, people who want to say that they want to stick to the letter of the law and that every law must be enforced exactly as it was written, that opinion would drive you to say that all 11 million undocumented immigrants should be deported. Others consider that really heartless, but still others consider that completely unreasonable. Exactly how would you round up 11 million people and deport them? Just the cost and the logistics alone is pretty much impossible. So this is one of the reasons why the government has been trying for years to fix the immigration system and to figure out some way to deal with the 11 million people in this country illegally. So when Obama came out on Thursday night and he issued some executive orders, there was 3 points that he hit. Now let's talk about those points before explaining the pros, the cons, the benefits, the holdbacks. So here's exactly what Obama did. First, President Obama's action to fix our broken immigration system will secure our border by continuing to deploy more resources to the border to strengthen enforcement and focusing on deporting undocumented immigrants who recently crossed the border. Now let's talk about the first part, when he says he's going to strengthen the border even more than it is today. There are many people that consider this an open border situation. They say that there's this unstoppable flow of immigrants coming across, especially the Mexican border. But that doesn't really hold up against the fact. There are people who are actually on Obama's side who actually want immigration reform that have dubbed him the deporter-in-chief. He's deported more people in 6 years than George Bush did in 8 years. Here's a chart from the Pew Research Center that actually shows the increase in deportations under Obama. Those numbers that you see are not single digits. Those are in the thousands. Inside those deportations, 25% of them actually came from the border, meaning the increased border security down there is working. They're actually taking up a bigger portion of the deportations right there at the border. It went from 17% last year to 25% this year. And then in respect to the flow of immigrants coming across the border, the number has actually dropped over the last 10 years. In 2005, it hit its high at 1.1 million immigrants a year. But now it's actually down to 425,000. Now let's go on to the second point that he put in about focusing on deporting the people who recently came here. President Obama is increasing accountability so more than 4 million undocumented immigrants have the opportunity to play by the rules. In order to temporarily stay in the U.S. without fear of deportation, these undocumented parents of U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents would have to have been here for 5+ years, pass a background check, and pay taxes. So the idea that people could just come over tomorrow, come over the day before this happened, and suddenly become part of this executive action is wrong. When people say this is actually going to increase illegal immigration, that more people are going to try to come here because they're going to try to take benefits from this, it's not going to happen. He already stated exactly in this that you have to have been here for 5+ years. And basically he's just extending this to the parents of current U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents and other family members. So you can't just come over by yourself and suddenly say, yeah, I'm part of this. That's not how this executive action was written. So the next part of that slide was actually that people have to pass a background check. Anyone who fails that background check, anyone who's deemed a criminal or has felonies on their record, or for any reason, they're going to get deported as well. So the people who were saying that this is going to cover massive amounts of criminals and gang members and all that, again, is not what's covered in this bill. And that's just not the facts. And for those fiscal conservatives out there, the third part of this is actually really important. The point of getting them out of the shadows and getting them on the books is so that they can pay taxes. People keep talking about freeloaders on the system. This is getting them to contribute to that system. Now, the third slide actually just kind of wraps up what he said in the first two. President Obama is taking new steps to fix our broken immigration system and increase accountability by cracking down on illegal immigration at the border, deporting felons, not families, holding accountable certain undocumented immigrants by requiring they pass a background check and pay taxes. It's time for Republicans in Congress to finish the job and pass comprehensive immigration reform. Now, the part of that last slide that he was referring to is the so-called Gang of Eight bill. This was a bill from about 2 years ago or a year and a half ago that 4 Democrat senators and 4 Republican senators got together in the Senate and battled it out. They came to a compromise. A lot of people didn't think it was perfect, but it was doable. It was definitely a step forward in fixing the immigration system. But it passed the Senate, but then got to the House floor and nothing happened. John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, refused to bring it up for a vote. Now, I'm not sure if he refused to bring it up because he was afraid it would pass and that would anger the Republican base, or if there was something else. Maybe they just didn't like it. Maybe they think it wasn't harsh enough. But the fact of the matter was the Republicans then could have created in the House their own immigration bill and gotten that passed. If they decided they wanted something that was a little stricter, more money on the border, less actual pathways to citizenship, any of that, they could have crafted their own bill, and then the 2 bills, the House bill and the Senate bill, could have gone into reconciliation, and they could have figured a way to put those together. But the House refused to do that. So, when Obama's talking about it's in the Republicans' hands, they can actually take up the Gang of Eight bill still. It's been languishing in the House for over 500 days, but they can still bring it up. And if they do, and it gets passed, these executive orders that he just passed will be nullified. There'll be no point to having them. Now let's move on to the fact that after Obama actually issued these executive orders, the fight over, does he have the power to do that? It's a good question, so let's dive into it. The Conservative Party right now has one hero that they go to for everything. They seem to want this person to come back from the dead and take over the country again because that's when we were a true conservative country. And that's Ronald Reagan. But this is another example of cognitive dissonance because Reagan in 1987 issued an executive order on immigration, expanding people who were protected from deportation. He did this because in 1986, there was an immigration bill that was actually passed through the Congress and signed into law by Reagan. But that bill had a big loophole in it. What it was saying was that certain people were covered and they were going to be allowed to stay here and try to make things right. But what it didn't cover was their children. So immediately, it became apparent that children were going to be ripped away from their parents and deported back to their home countries. Christian and Catholic bishops from all over the world were pleading with Reagan to not allow this to happen. It came from basically a compassionate place that said whether or not they got here legally, do not tear these families apart. So Reagan decided he was going to try to fix this. He tried to get another bill passed through Congress that was a stopgap measure, a patch to the 1986 bill. It didn't happen. It failed. So what did Reagan do when he was presented with a Congress that wouldn't pass that patch? He did it himself. He wrote an executive order that expanded the coverage of the 1986 bill, which you can see him talking about in that video at the beginning of the episode. 3 years later, George H.W. Bush did the same thing. He actually had another bill that went to the Senate, got passed actually 81-17. It passed with a huge margin, but then went to the House and died because the House refused to bring it to the floor, just like the House is now. And another Republican president, George H.W. Bush, decided if he couldn't get it through Congress, he was going to do it himself. So he expanded on the 1987 bill even further to include more people, more connected family members. His actually brought in 1.5 million more people under that protection. And to the estimates of how many people were in the country at the time, illegally, his new movement actually covered 40% or a little more of those people, which is equal to or greater than what Obama just did. Obama's covers 4 to 5 million people, but there's an estimated 11 million people. So in terms of scope, George H.W. Bush pushed it even farther. I mean, even conservative legal scholars who study this are saying that Obama does have the power. They're not agreeing with the fact that he's using it, but he does have the power to do it. the opposition is not coming from a legal front, it's coming from a political and talk radio front. So the idea that they might actually sue Obama over this brings me to the point of the Supreme Court. If this hit the Supreme Court, people have already looked into whether or not they think the Supreme Court would uphold it. And most people, if not all of them, are saying that the Supreme Court would. The reason why they say this is because the Supreme Court actually had to make a decision about the Arizona law, otherwise known as the Papers, Please law. They actually struck down a number of parts of that law, and the reasoning that they used to strike it down almost word for word describes what Obama's doing here. And it says that he has the power to do it. So you have to believe that Obama, who is an ex-constitutional law professor, knows the Supreme Court history, and he followed it when it happened in 2010 with the Arizona law. So he knows where his parameters lie. He feels very strongly that if this gets brought to the Supreme Court, he's going to win. The people who actually were in the majority opinion on the Arizona law was Kennedy and Roberts. Those two added to the liberal wing of the court is going to make it pretty much a 6-3 decision, if even that low. So now that we've looked at actually if Obama can actually do what he just did, if he has the precedent or the legal ability, let's actually look what the opponents of this can try to do in response, or at least what they say they can do. First off, you have impeachment. There are a lot of people that brought up impeachment even before he made the executive order. They were calling this for a long time. But there are political watchdogs that know that an impeachment proceeding, especially in the last 2 years of Obama's term, probably will not work out very well. A, they're not likely to get it past the Senate. Yes, they've gotten a majority, and they will have a majority for the next 2 years, but not large enough to actually make it stick. And last time they tried to impeach a Democratic president, Bill Clinton, it didn't really go out too well for them. Then there's the government shutdown. There are other people who are calling for a government shutdown in response to the immigration executive orders. But the last time the government was shut down, the Republicans didn't really gain from it. In fact, Standard & Poor's estimated that the 19 days that the government was shut down cost the economy $24 billion. And people have basically hammered the Republican Party for it. Then there are other people who say they should defund anything that would actually help these immigration orders go into effect. That's a novel idea, considering that the House of Representatives legally controls the purse strings of the government. They control who gets money. So the idea of just saying these people don't get money, and since they don't, they can't enforce these laws, or they can't enforce these executive orders, that's not a bad idea, except for one small problem. Immigration enforcement comes from the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security isn't funded by the government. They're self-funded. They actually make their money through application fees. The House of Representatives has no bearing over the budget for the Department of Homeland Security. They can't stop them from enforcing. So those are some of the ideas that the opponents of these executive orders are coming up with in order to respond. But so far, none of them really look like good ideas. So to end this, let's talk about where do we go from here. There are some on the Republican side that said Obama's issuing of these executive orders has actually ruined any chance of the Gang of Eight bill getting passed because it nullifies communication and cooperation between the two parties. That this is basically what they call poison the well. Now that would be true if you didn't look at the past 6 years and see if the well hadn't been poisoned already. The fact of the matter is the Republicans have not cooperated with the president, or the president hasn't cooperated with them either, in the last 6 years very well at all. So the theory that they would have picked up the Gang of Eight bill before this, if we had just left it alone, can't really be held true. In fact, Obama waited to do this. He wanted to issue these orders earlier, but he kicked the can down the road because of pleading from certain representatives in the Republican Party that said, wait, give us time to pass this. He waited, he gave them time, it didn't work. He did it another time, kicked it past the midterms. That was probably more for his own protection, but still, they had the time to pass it, and they didn't. So he's waited long enough, according to him. And for those people who are saying that this can't be reversed, these are just executive orders. They can be completely reversed by the next president. These orders that Obama just issued cover the next 3 years, starting in January 1st of next year. So that is going to go past his presidency. So whoever comes in next, whether it be Democrat or Republican, can change these orders. So I hope you've come to the end of this video a little bit more informed about what's happened in the executive orders that Obama issued on Thursday night. And I hope now that anytime you find yourself in a discussion with people talking about the immigration debate, you can bring up some of these facts. Now, I'm not saying that means you have to support Obama, but it does mean that you can look at some of these facts and figure out whether or not he has the legal right to do this and what the real definition of what he did is. So thanks again for watching. It's another episode of the Motley Stew Show. You can like, favorite, subscribe, share anywhere you like, and that really helps me out, and I appreciate it. And for those longtime viewers and the new viewers, if you haven't seen this before, a little bit of Logan.
Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Oh, let's turn around this way. The sun, he's all shut up. Ah, there you are.
Say hi, Daddy.
Logan. Giddy up.
Say yeehaw.
Hey, over here.
Logan, say yeehaw.
Logan, why are you looking their way?
Yeehaw.
But the fact of the matter was, the Republicans then could have created in the House their own immigration bill and gotten that passed. If they decided they wanted something that was a little stricter, more money on the border, less actual pathways to citizenship, any of that, they could have crafted their own bill, and then the two bills, the House bill and the Senate bill, could have gone into reconciliation, and they could have figured a way to put those together.